So I want to begin by telling you a story about a 12-year-old boy named Jim Doty who lived in Lancaster, California in 1968. So Jim loved magic, and one morning he woke up and he couldn't find his favorite magic trick, a fake plastic thumb out of which he could make things appear. And it wasn't just a matter of him being able to buy a new thumb. You see, his father was an alcoholic and he was often in and out of work. So Jim, he scrounged together whatever money he could find and he got on his bike and rode across town to this magic shop that he'd heard about. And he walks inside and he sees this older woman behind the counter. She introduces herself as Ruth. And he says, "Hi, my name's Jim. I've lost my fake thumb. I was hoping you could help me find a replacement." And Ruth, she kind of shrugged her shoulders and said, "Honestly, this is my son's store and he's not here right now." And she could tell that Jim was a bit dejected by this, so she asked him a question. "Why do you like magic?" Now, no adult had ever asked Jim a question before, let alone about magic. So he thought for a moment and he said, "I like that I can practice at something and get really good at it. I like that I'm in control. Whether or not the trick works is entirely up to me. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks, says, or does." Ruth kind of looked Jim up and down and said, "You know what? I like you, Jim. I like you a lot. I'm only in town for the next 6 weeks, but if you come to the magic shop every day, I promise I'll teach you some real magic. Not the kind that you can buy in a store, but the kind that will allow anything you want to appear. For real. No tricks, no sleight of hand, no fake thumbs. How's that sound to you?" He thought about this. To make anything he wants appear, he was in. So the next day, he arrives at the magic shop. And they sit down together in a back room. And the first trick that Ruth teaches him is she wants him to relax all of his muscles from his head to his toes. She says, "I want you to practice this here and at home every day." So he works on that for 10 days and he comes back and she teaches him the second trick, which is quieting the narrator in your mind by focusing on your breathing. So he works on that for weeks. And then eventually she felt like he had that down, and then she moved on to the third trick, which is replacing that narrator with positive affirmations. Things like, "I am worthy, I am loved, I love myself, I love others, my heart is open." Ruth explained to Jim that every decision you make in your life needs to be made with vulnerability and affirmation. Because if your heart's not open, then you can't do the fourth trick, which is being able to make whatever you want appear. So the final day arrives. And he comes to the magic shop and he sits there and he goes through what she had taught him. He relaxes his muscles from head to toe. He focuses on his breathing. He says his positive affirmations. And then Ruth says, "Jim, I want you to close your eyes. And I want you to tell me what you want more than anything in the world." And he thought for a moment and he said, "I want to be a doctor." Now, in 4th grade, Jim had a doctor come to his class and give a presentation, and he was enthralled. And so he asked the doctor after, he said, "How do I become like you?" And he says, "Well, there's a lot of school. You have to go to college and go to med school. But the most important thing is that you have to care about people." Well, at the time, Jim could hardly imagine going to college. I mean, he lived in poverty, and every teacher he had ever had dismissed him as a lost cause. But after these 6 weeks with Ruth, the impossible felt possible. So he said to Ruth, "I want to become a doctor." And then he corrected himself and he said, "I know I'm going to be a doctor." And she said, yes, that's it. You have to know you're going to be a doctor. You have to picture it in your mind. And if you set your intention on this and you imagine it every single day, eventually that intention will become a reality. And I don't want to ruin the story for you too much, but he does become a doctor. In fact, he becomes one of the top neurosurgeons in the United States. And you can read more about his story in his book, Into the Magic Shop. But what we're going to be talking about today is how our imaginations can not only shape our reality, but how it can help us to solve problems, and how our imaginations are one of the most important ingredients for finding a fulfilling life. And to begin, I want to introduce you to someone who uses their imagination all the time to help people. Will you join me in the kitchen? So I am so excited to welcome Dr. Kristy Belton to Kokoro. Thank you for being here today.
Of course.
So the way we always begin this segment is with some food that matches the theme of what we're talking about. And since we're talking about imagination, my spotty internet research told me that eggs, because they have vitamin B and choline in them, that apparently it helps with neurotransmitters and with memory and all that. I don't know if that actually does anything for imagination, but I thought, hey, let's give it a try. This is my wife's recipe that she does, and it tends to be super tasty. So anyways, let's give it a try, and then we'll dive into imagination. Does that sound good?
Sounds excellent.
All right. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
I can't take any credit for how good it is, because really it is my wife's thing. So Kristy, tell me a little bit about your background, what you used to do, and what you do now.
So I used to be an academic. I used to teach at university, international studies and human rights courses. Then I transitioned out of that, ended up working for a nonprofit that put on conferences globally.
Didn't you work with the UN at one point?
So I had a short stint at the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. That was, I think, 2008. But when I left academia and then left the NGO world, it was for this, basically connecting people back to the sacred within through practices outside. So I ended up getting my forest therapy certification, my yoga certification, and my creativity coaching certification. It's like I'm collecting these things, but I created what's called Prairie Pathways. It's all about bringing people back to their inner nature through these practices in outer nature. And one of the practices I really love, other than guiding people outdoors through forest therapy and yoga, is writing wild.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because I think this is a really interesting program that you run. So explain what wild means, because it's not, I think somebody might hear wild and just say, oh, I'm writing everywhere, right? It's an acronym. So tell us what it means and how doing this practice may be different than other types of creative writing.
Okay, so writing wild means writing with wonder, intuition, love, and daring. Writing wild is about starting with beginner's mind, saying, you know what, all these things that I've been taught, I will put them aside for now, and I'm going to begin with wonder. Begin asking questions, get curious, allow yourself to be filled with awe about the world around you. But intuition is more of, I would say, the heart aspect, which comes from the love within that writing wild acronym, the love part. Can you love yourself and your message and what you're meant to receive enough to be a channel for it? Can you go back to that part of you that when you came into this world didn't have a set way of being? And can you dare to once access, can you dare to share it? The very act of writing something down is sharing it. Because if you've been writing with wonder, you followed your intuition, you're allowing love of your own voice to come through. That act of writing in and of itself is daring.
Now this is interesting, because I think that there's a lot of people who might say, I'm not creative. That's for a specific kind of person. That's not me. I don't have that ability inside of me. So what would you say to somebody who maybe doesn't feel like they have any imagination?
I'd say I hear you and I don't believe you. And let me tell you why this isn't true. When we think about a particular outcome, whatever it may be in a relationship, it might be in a job, it might be in a creative writing project, and we think, this particular outcome, this is going to happen. You are using your imagination to think ahead of, this is how it's going to be. You have no idea if that's how it's going to actually be, but you've used your imagination, oftentimes, unfortunately, negatively, to act or think from a place oftentimes of fear, because we think ahead on negative outcomes. Our what ifs are typically, well, what if this particular bad thing happens? Or what if that particular bad thing happens? What if we changed our what ifs to, what if something that I couldn't even imagine possible in terms of good actually plays out? And on another side of it, you have stories that you concoct about why we think the actions of somebody else played out the way they did. But we've used our imagination to create a story that this person acted this way because. So all to say, Alex, we use our imaginations day in and day out, thinking about hypotheticals, acting on those hypotheticals, and that is a highly imaginative act.
What advice would you give to somebody who wants to try to become more imaginative, wants to be more creative, and doesn't quite know how to begin to take that first step to get there?
3-5 minutes max. Free write real quick. What are some things you've always wanted to do but you're too afraid to do? If you don't like that one, fine, sit down. Who are some people that you admire? What do they do? Not why do you admire them, just list what do they do. So whether it's the first list or the second list, take something from that and say, all right, I'm gonna make an action, whatever it may be. But you pick the easiest thing that you're curious about and say, you know what, I'm gonna try this out. No pressure, there's nothing that you have to produce from this other than to teach your brain, I can look for things that bring me joy and take tiny little actions on them. I think a large percentage of the world's population, I'm gonna say world here, they've forgotten how to tap into what is it that I actually want. And yes, I know not everybody's gonna know it because they've never been asked, what do you love? What brings you alive? When you were little, what is it that you wanted to do? Who did you want to become, right? They don't get asked these kinds of questions. A lot of this is mindset, Alex. A lot is mindset.
And I think those are wise words for people who may feel trapped or stuck, or who just feel like they aren't able to access the person who they want to be. I do think the beginning of that begins with a glimpse of imagination of, what do I want to be? Where do I want to go? What could I become? But it starts with that kind of just vision of it. And then from there, you can move into it. Well, I just want to thank you for coming. I think what you do in terms of helping people find who they are inside through your wild writing program, I think that's amazing. I hope that it becomes something that more people do, because more people need to do what you're offering. And I just want to say thank you for being a part of this and for spreading, your message to people who need to hear it.
Thank you, Alex.
When I was a child, I used to spend hours in my mind playing with my action figures. My home life could be a bit chaotic, so I really tried to find my way through by creating these worlds that would allow me to escape. I remember when I was in 5th grade, my teacher, whenever we would get done with our language arts class, we were given the opportunity to have free time. And every student in our class would pull out a book and start reading. But me, I put my head down on my desk and I would start imagining stories. And I remember about midway through the year, my mom came home from parent-teacher conferences and she started screaming at me. I was the only one in class who didn't read. Now, my teacher never asked me what it was that I was doing when I put my head down on my desk. I think she just assumed that I was sleeping. But even if I had told her what I was doing, I doubt it really would have mattered too much. She would have seen it as a waste of time. But to me, I thought I was being more productive than my peers. They were consuming stories. I was creating them. So in our society, children are allowed to make believe, but adults, not so much. We have to deal with reality. And this is really unfortunate because some of the greatest inventions and innovations have come as a result of people daydreaming. So for example, Nikola Tesla, who was known as always staring off into space. He was a chronic daydreamer. He's the one who came up with the first alternating current motor. And he did so while he was walking through a park in Budapest in 1882. So Tesla had been trying to devise an electrical system utilizing rotating magnetic fields, and it just had been eluding him how to achieve this. And so one day he decided he's going to take a break, and he starts walking through a park with a friend of his, and he starts reciting a poem. And while he's reciting the poem, all of a sudden, all that daydreaming, it just kind of hits him all at once. He takes this stick and he starts literally drawing in the sand. And indeed, the principles behind this are the same principles that we still use to this day to power our homes. It's the reason why electricity is so widely available and easily distributed all over the world. And in fact, it's the reason why he was able to create one of his most famous inventions, the Tesla coil. A Tesla coil is a transformer that uses high-frequency alternating current to produce beautiful, vibrant arcs of electricity. And none of this would have been possible had it not been for Tesla daydreaming. It's sad to me that adulthood is equated with having to abandon your imagination. In my opinion, this equivalency, it kind of destroys the potential of our minds, and it prevents us from becoming our best selves. And to talk more about this, I want you to join me upstairs. Whether you realize it or not, everyone is a creative storyteller. And the most important story that we are constantly crafting is the story of ourselves. Who are you? What does your life mean? What legacy are you going to leave behind? You know, the saddest thing that I see is when somebody doesn't realize that they have the ability to craft their own narrative. Because the most beautiful aspect of our lives is having the freedom and the opportunity to be able to choose our own path. And this is where our creativity and dreaming becomes so important. Because you have the ability to imagine this amazing narrative for how you want your life to go. The problem is that a lot of adults, they equate dreams with risk. So if I follow my dreams and they don't work out, like, how will that make me feel? What happens if I fail? Well, I can tell you, we regret the decisions we don't make far more than the ones that we do. But I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, Alex, you know, I'm not a dreamer. I'm not creative. Well, I guarantee you that you are. You just forgot how to do it. Do you remember when you were a child? I mean, you probably used your imagination all the time. But then you got to a certain age and you realize, oh, imagination is for children. But just like Jim Doty entering into the magic shop, with the right direction, you can reclaim your imagination. So the first thing that you need to do is you got to get rid of all the distractions. And that means you got to put away the phone, you got to close the laptop, you got to turn off the television, you got to turn down the music. And then you need to change your environment. You need to go to some other place, just like Tesla, go walking through a park, go somewhere quiet. The goal is to give your mind space to wander. Let yourself daydream a little bit. Now, initially, it's going to be challenging, even boring, but you got to fight the urge to fill the space with activity. And the first time you do it, probably nothing's going to happen. The same is true for the second time. But if you keep getting rid of the distractions, I think you'll be amazed at how your creativity starts to flow. The ideas that start pouring out of your mind. And if you try this, if you give it a shot, I would love to hear from you. Please tell me about all the ideas that you come up with for yourself, for your life. because it's absolutely worth it to invest the time in allowing your imagination to flourish. Daydream, just give yourself the space to be. So no matter who you are, no matter where you've been, no matter how you feel, please know that you are loved, you are seen, and you are cared for. If by no one else, by me. My name is Alex Lang, and until next time.